Okay, so everyone says that we don't know what ancient megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe or Stonehenge, everyone says we don't know what they are. But actually, we do. They're memory sites. But that won't mean anything to you. Not yet. Because first you have to find out how do myth and memory and sending messages across time connect up with megalithic sites. So let's start with sending messages across time. Because have you ever thought, how did our ancient ancestors send their knowledge from generation to generation? How did they pass along their experience? If you're like, no, Sarah Booth, they wrote it down. No. I'm talking about before writing. Before writing, you have to remember everything that you know. So how do you remember all of the animals and the plants and the insects that are around you? How do you know when to hunt and where to gather? How do you remember how to get from here to there, no matter where you're going? And how do you hand down all of your laws, your moral codes, and your genealogy so you don't go making babies with people in your own family? I mean, what are you going to do? Write it down? No. Well, our ancient ancestors figured this out. Who knows how many thousands of years ago? And we know exactly how they did it because the author of the memory code, Dr. Lynne Kelly, she found out from the people who would actually know, Aboriginal Australians and American Indians. And you know what they told her? They said, we use mnemonic devices. So you're passing information down orally, right? You have to find ways of making it easy to remember and hard to lose. And everyone knows that stories and sayings and songs are sticky. They stick in your memory. Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. I before E, except after C. Everyone knows that it's easy to remember repetition in rhythm and rhyme. Repetition in rhythm and rhyme. Repetition in rhythm and rhyme. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! You know, United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru, Republic Dominican, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador too. Remember that song? Because I do. It's a song, and songs are sticky. Okay, to sort of Sarah Boothify Dr. Kelly, you weave everything that you know into your mythology. And one way that you do it actually is by turning the animals around you into these larger than life characters who go on magical adventures doing wildly outrageous, unrealistic deeds. And you tell your stories this way, not because you believe that that story is literally true. No. You do it because, like Dr. Kelly says, making myths vivid makes them more memorable. And that is exactly what you're going for when you're trying to send information across time. You're trying to make it easy to remember and hard to lose. So for example, if you belong to the Guriwala people in Australia, you tell the story of Buri. And this story has characters like Guriwala, the small man with big arms who's rowing your people to safety across this big body of water, and a baranga, a big vessel that they stole from Buri. Now, in the story, while he's rowing, Guriwala's kind of boasting. He's like, look at my big arms. I've got strong arms. I'll get us there. And as he's boasting, he starts growing fur and a big black nose and big funny ears. And then after all of this epic fighting on this magical, adventurous escape from Buri Buri, finally, your people have reached land. And Guriwala, he's exhausted from rowing. And he's crying because he's ashamed of how he looks. And so, climbing the nearest tree and hugging it, he falls asleep. Now, Guriwala is a real animal. They're small like Guriwala. They have big, strong arms, big black noses, big funny ears, and a piercing cry. And they really do sleep in eucalyptus trees for 20 hours a day in Australia. What kind of animal is Guriwala? Guriwala, Guriwala, koala, koala. It's a koala. So do you see? Myths are magical because you can do tons of different things with myths. Like at their most basic level, this story is, just pure entertainment. It's interesting, right? But on a higher level, it's also teaching you how to identify koalas, even if you've never seen one before. And so, no one has to tell you what they look like. No one has to tell you what they sound like. No one has to tell you how they behave. You just know it because it's implied in the story. Plus, on another level, myths actually teach you how to behave. So what do you want to bet? That if your Guriwala mama said, don't be like Guriwala, you would know that's a metaphor that means don't be boastful. Or maybe even don't be a crybaby. So this is just one sliver of a story. Now imagine that all of your knowledge, everything that you know, is taught to you through myths. It's taught to you through songs. And at first, those story songs, they teach you right from wrong. But imagine as you get older, as you get initiated into those stories, imagine that you learn how to decode what else the myths mean. Imagine finding out that these characters in your stories and the places that they go, imagine being like, oh, these are real places and real animals around me. Imagine learning which bird to listen for to find your way back to land. Imagine being initiated into deeper levels of these myths and learning to decode the metaphors on an even higher level. Imagine finding out that the messages hidden in the story, they're teaching you survival information, like where to find food during a drought, where to find resources like red ochre and flint and obsidian, food, water, even shelter. Imagine realizing that there's a reason that your Adnayamantha elders tell you that the sounds that are coming from the Flinders Mountains is a snake and it's turning around. And that if you don't settle down, the snake will vomit and it will hurt your people. Imagine realizing the real reason is because it's 3 different kinds of warnings. Number 1, it's a great way of getting kids to behave. Like, settle down or the snake's going to get you, right? We know what that's like. But it's also a warning that tells you what to do when you're around these Australia's like zillions of different poisonous snakes. But on an even higher level, it's a warning about these radioactive snakes of uranium that are running through the ground. Yes, Aboriginal Australians knew that the uranium was there in the ground. They knew it was dangerous, and they warned each other. So think about this. Imagine understanding multiple messages just because of one metaphor about a snake. And you know what else I found while researching? How about that the myths from Rapa Nui, aka Easter Island, those myths told the islanders when to sow, when to reap, when to fish. It even told them when to surf. Like, that is so cool, right? And in ancient Sumer, women taught each other how to make beer by turning the recipe into a story song. So the point is that with just one myth, you could send multiple messages and tons of information, and you're doing it all at the same time. And so you would know tons of these songs because you'd have a story song for everything, right? And each one is encoded with layers and layers and layers of information. Here's what I want you to get out of this. This information is useful. It's practical. It's rational. It's just disguised as a story. And that's why when you and I hear myths, we don't know what they mean. We have no idea. We don't hear all of the knowledge and the life lessons and the information that's packed inside because we're not initiated. We don't have the keys that unlock the metaphors and those deeper levels of meaning. Plus, we're only given the public story songs that are meant for children. We're not initiated into those stories. We don't get the higher levels anyway. So a lot of people see myths as these childish explanations of the world. But we are the ones who are myth understanding. Because people don't know how oral cultures used myths to preserve and pass on information. But now, guess what? You do. And you want to know one more thing that's fascinating about using stories as mnemonic devices? You didn't just tell your knowledge as stories. You sang it. You danced it. You chanted it. Because these are rituals. And rituals are things that you repeat. And repetition helps you remember. Remember? And you performed these rituals not because you were worshiping, but because you were remembering. Acting out information activates your memory. Remember? Acting out information activates your memory. So do you see what I'm saying here? Stories store information. You'd sing your stories because repetition and rhythm and rhyme makes those story songs, the myth, all of the information that's encoded inside, it makes it sticky. You couldn't just write down everything that you needed to know or remember, right? But if you know the songs and you know how to decode them, you have access to this complete guide to life. So now doesn't it make sense why myths are so unrealistic? This is why. Because like Dr. Kelly says, making myths vivid makes them more memorable. And that is exactly what you're going for when you're trying to send information across time. You're trying to make it easy to remember and hard to lose. So do you see what this means? You guys, this is so important. This is why we tell stories. This is like the origin myth for stories. Listen to me. Read my lips. This is why We tell stories. Everyone thinks that myths are just made up malarkey that people who were magical thinkers used to explain a world that they didn't understand. But we are the ones who are myth understanding. The truth is that stories are like a memory bank for your knowledge. And the information that they store is rational, it's practical, it's useful. And they have the special power that allows them to send that information across time. But story songs are not the only way that our ancestors remembered information. There's actually another ingenious technology that Dr. Kelly found out about. And it explains something we don't understand. Have you ever seen these? The Folkton drums? Or these mysterious Roman thingamajigs? Or what about the unexplainable Towie balls? Archaeologists, scholars, scientists, they have no clue what these objects are. And it's kind of ironic once you know what they actually are. So Dr. Kelly said that when she showed the Towie balls to her Australian Aboriginal teachers, they go, "No, their chiringa is a sphere." What's a chiringa? Well, a chiringa is a mnemonic device. And so what Dr. Kelly calls these little handheld memory devices like this, she calls them portable memory objects. But to the cultures who still use these little memory boards, like a lot of Aboriginal Australian peoples, they're the chiringa. Or it's the lukasa to the Luba people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We have forgotten what these neat little mnemonic objects are, but they didn't. Ironic, right? And so these items are small. You can hold them in your hand. And the way that they work is you encode your mythology into this device by associating parts of your story song with each bead or each shell or little design that's on your memory gizmo. And then each hole or curve or shell on your little memory board follows a sequence. And that means you know where the story starts and you know where it goes. And so what that means is that as you're singing your story song, as you touch the bumps and the wavy bits, you touch the shells or the beads, and then the color, the size, the shape, even the muscle memory of the movement of your fingers, all of those things together trigger your memory. And it helps you remember that story song and sing it the precise way it was handed down to you. And then you'd repeat these story songs over and over and over until you would get so familiar with your little memory gizmo that you could probably just imagine it from memory and touch it with your mind. Like, how rad is that, you know? So when Dr. Kelly was explaining portable memory objects, I immediately thought, oh, wow, this explains the quipu. And the quipu are these knotted cords that the Incans used to send messages across their empire. And I was right, because Dr. Kelly talks about the quipu. And I thought, actually this also explains the charms and the chords that are on the back of the drums used by the Sami people who were in the Scandinavian regions of the Arctic Circle. And once I understood how to identify these portable memory objects, I started seeing them all over the world. Like, these Roman objects aren't so mysterious when you think, look how easy it is to follow the sequence of one hole getting bigger than the next. Because, even if you can write, sometimes you still need to remember things. Lone Wolf's winter count That was a mnemonic account of the Dakota's history. And everybody knows about the RongoRongo script from Rapa Nui, aka Easter Island. But did you know they used string figures to help them remember myths? Look, all of these objects, they may have different names, they may look different, they may work in different ways, but they all do the same thing. They help us remember. And listen up, because that brings us to something that is so crazy, because there is something else that we forgot about, and it's called mnemonic writing. See, in her book, Dr. Kelly talks about how RongoRongo writing, which are the symbols that are carved on the little wooden boards from Rapa Nui, right? AKA Easter Island. She said, RongoRongo is mnemonic. And everyone thinks that RongoRongo is this ancient writing that we don't know how to decode. And it's true. We don't know how to decode it. But it's not because it's writing. It's because it's mnemonic. And it's encoding information about the islanders' myths. Now, okay, as if that wasn't enough, you guys, I found out something else about RongoRongo while I was researching. Oh my gosh. It's nuts. We already knew that RongoRongo was mnemonic way back in the 1860s, because that's when the Bishop of Tahiti was given one of these little wooden tablets with RongoRongo on it. And so he starts trying to find someone from Easter Island who can read it. And he finally finds someone, and he's like, hey, can you read this? But he's really disappointed, because he notices that when this guy's reading the tablet, he's like, this guy is just reciting. He's not reading at all. When I read about this in Catherine Routledge's book, The Mystery of Easter Island, oh my gosh, I was like, I was dumbfounded. The islander was reading the tablet, because that's what those tablets were for. They were there to help you remember myths. But the bishop didn't know that. And so he keeps looking for someone to read these little tablets on his island. And he looks and looks and looks. And it takes a while. But finally, this bishop seems to figure out what's going on, because he writes. Each symbol was a peg on which to hang much longer matter, which was committed to memory. Okay, so once I knew that RongoRongo was mnemonic writing, I kept having all sorts of epiphanies, and I was making all sorts of connections. I go, oh, wow, this is why we can't decode things like the Phaistos disk, or Linear A, or the Indus Valley script, or RongoRongo writing. It's because they're not written languages. They're mnemonic symbols. It's so ironic that the things that we invented to help us remember, we keep forgetting. Nobody remembers this ancient form of recording information into your memory before we had the ability to record it in writing. So do you get it? This is a huge deal. Archaeologists, researchers, scientists, they have no idea. But now you do. And the thing is, people still try to decipher RongoRongo because they don't have this backstory. They're not making this connection between myth, memory, these little memory gizmos, and sending messages across time. But Dr. Kelly did. She figured it out, and she linked all of these different ideas together. And the thing is, this isn't even a new discovery. Really, She's just reminding us what memory cultures around the world never even forgot. This is so neat, right? I don't know about you, but this completely rewrote how I understand myths. And it helped me see, illiterate people in a new way. Because for me, it shifted what it means to record information. And I want to get into that, just not right now. Okay, so onward. Now that we've seen how myths connect with memory and mnemonic devices to send information across time, you might be thinking, get to it, Sarah Booth, how does all this connect to ancient megalithic sites? Be patient, my little chickens, okay? Because in order to see how all of this connects to Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, and all these mysterious places around the globe, you need to know one more thing that Dr. Kelly learned from her Aboriginal Australian teachers and how she translated it to megalithic sites around the world. Because there's more to this story, and it gets even better. Okay, so think about this. If everything you know is encoded into stories, you'd know a lot of stories, right? So besides your little portable memory device, how do you remember so many story songs? Well, memory cultures invented a very clever way of backing up their knowledge and reinforcing their memories. And we know this because in Australia, where Dr. Kelly's from, Aboriginal people like the Anangu, the Yunayawa, and the Kuri, they are among the oldest continuous cultures in the world. And they can trace their history back at least 65,000 years. And it's precisely because in that long period of time, they perfected this way of remembering by turning the landscape itself into a giant memory board. And so this mnemonic system that belongs to the Aboriginal Australian peoples, this is just a tiny part of what they call the dreaming. And the way that the dreaming works in this part of the dreaming is that you would embed knowledge into the landscape by associating your story songs with every significant land feature around you. Places like maybe painted caves, landmarks, special locations, especially sources of water like lakes and streams and springs. Everything has a name, it has a song, it has a place in the story. That lake has a song. That cave is part of a song. That distinctive rock formation has a song. That special tree has a song. And you associate your story songs with these important landmarks the same way that you associate your story songs with the beads and the shells on your little memory gizmo. It works the same way. And remember, these songs are packed with information. So, according to Gumroy Newman from Australia's Guguya, Waka Waka, and Gamilaroi people, inside your story song, you might be told to stop here and make a camp. Or this is where you find water or shelter or food. And it's so neat because your stories link you from site to site. That means you can navigate just by remembering the songs. Places you've never even been. And it's because your mythology works like a mental map. Your songs show you the way. And so as you travel your traditional routes between your hunting and gathering grounds, you're following the footprints of your ancestors. You sing the way. You sing how to get from here to there. You sing the trees, the plants, the animals, and the people who live here. You sing your history, your laws, and your tribal land rights. You sing your relationship with water and country and to each other. You're singing so you won't forget. So it's kind of like a portable memory object on a much grander scale. It's a giant memory board. But that's not all, because once you get to each site, you back up your memory with other mnemonic devices. So maybe you perform a ritual that's associated with that site. Like you might stop at a lake and perform a dance. You might leave a gift or an offering at one of your resources. You might perform a ceremony at a painted cave. And you do it not because you're worshiping. You're doing it because those rituals that you repeat help you remember. Acting out information activates your memory. Remember? It makes knowledge sticky. It sticks in your memory. Now, public story songs like this, they're actually hard to find. But guess what I stumbled on? As I was reading a very old book, I ran into this Zuni song that was captured by Matilda Cox Stevenson around late 1800s, early 1900s. And I knew it was a map song because of what I learned from Dr. Kelly. Here's just a snippet. We come to the middle of a series of springs. Here we get up and move on. We come to the plumed serpent house. Here we get up and move on. We come to the watercress place. Here we get up and move on. We come to the small spring place. Here we get up and move on. We come to the spring in a hole in a mound. Here we get up and move on. And this song goes on and on and on. It's a long song. And did you notice how each place name is actually describing a spring? That means that as you're traveling, you know what to look for. You know what these places are going to look like, right? And I'm reciting it, but look, in its original language, you can tell that it's a song. And then it has repetition and rhythm and rhyme, repetition and rhythm and rhyme. And I'm like, when I ran across this, I was like, tell me more. You know, do the Zuni people still sing this song? And I want to know more than that too, because I want to know, does your culture have stories like this? Do they still tell these stories? Because I know that the British people used to have stories that helped you traverse the aisles. And so if you have stories like this, please let me know. I would love to know. Okay, so here's what is incredible about all of this. What Dr. Kelly realized is that this way of embedding information into this familiar location, this is exactly like the method of Loci that the ancient Greek and Roman orators used to remember their big old long speeches. You'd encode what you wanted to remember into these points within this familiar location. Like at that statue, you talk about justice. That hallway, truth. That vase, wisdom. And so on and so on. And then while you're speaking, you trigger your memory by retracing that path. And you do it either physically, like, or you do it in your memory. And you just imagine it, right? So the point is that the ancient Greeks inherited this knowledge. They learned about the method of Loci from the people who were using it long before them. Okay, so now that you know this backstory about myth and memory and sending messages across time. This is what you've been waiting for. This is how it connects with megalithic sites. I'm so excited. How do megalithic sites connect up? Well, Dr. Kelly has made a connection that nobody else has. And it's going to blow your mind. Because think about this. What happens when all of your knowledge is encoded into the landscape, but now your people, you're starting to settle and you're getting into agriculture. You aren't going back to your sacred sites on a regular basis, but you still need your maps. You still need to know how to find your resources. You still need to know survival information like what to do if there's a drought. You still need to remember tons of information. What do you do? Well, Dr. Kelly says you construct memory sites. And if I may Sarah Boothify her theory, you drive wooden posts into circles in the ground. And then you haul bluestones from Wales to upgrade your Woodhenge to Stonehenge. You meticulously move desert rocks, exposing the lighter soil underneath to create walking paths in the shape of animals, like a giant bird or spider. You carve enormous stone figures and you place them along your ceremonial paths and at performance sites on Rapa Nui, aka Easter Island. You haul, you carve, you dig, you paint, and you recreate your mnemonic landscape on a smaller scale. So you build these monumental structures and then you transfer your map and your myths and your rituals and you're recoding all of your story songs and all of that information. So now information that you used to associate with these land features is linked to this enormous stone or a curve in the path or a carved figure. And just like you walked from site to site to site on your traditional paths, you do the same thing. Now you walk Stonehenge and the Nazca lines and the Serpent Mound. You still sing the way. You perform your rituals, your ceremonies, and your chants and your dances at each stone or curve in the path, the same way that you used to at your sacred sites. Do you see? You walk between the giant moai heads on Easter Island's processional ways, or you walk around the sacred path along the perimeter of the island, stopping to dance on the ahu, the performance platforms with stone figures. You enter restricted spaces at Chaco Canyon, at Machu Picchu, at Karahan Tepe, and you're doing sacred ceremonies and you're chanting. And you're doing it not because you're worshiping, but because you're remembering. Acting out information activates your memory. So rad, right? This is so rad. And the way that I see it now that you're getting into agriculture, now that you're settling down into these more permanent settlements, you'd have news story songs, wouldn't you? And they would probably tell you, here's how you build this stone circle with astronomical alignments, and here's how you use it as a calendar so that you know when to plant and when to reap. Your new songs might have new moral codes, like, here's what we've learned about getting along in these great big groups of people who now stay in one place. Dr. Kelly says that what you would do is you'd probably travel to these sites and you'd join these great big gatherings of people around the time of the solstices. And so you'd meet up at Sacsayhuaman, at Göbekli Tepe, at Poverty Point in Chaco Canyon to celebrate the changing seasons, to be social, to find marriage partners, to calibrate your calendar. You'd trade news, information, technology, and knowledge. And most importantly, you'd be there to learn and remember. I see it as this huge knowledge exchange because you're sharing knowledge. And at the same time, you're passing it along to the next generation. You're handing it down relay style from one generation to the next. And so at this point, this is just a theory, but the evidence supporting it, it's overwhelming. And it explains so much. Like, is this not amazing? Do you see how astounding this is? You guys, Dr. Kelly has solved the mystery of Easter Island, of Stonehenge, and the Nazca Lines. Dr. Lynne Kelly, say her name with me. Dr. Lynne Kelly. She's made these connections no one else was making. She's made the link between myths, memory, sending messages across time, and megalithic sites. They're memory sites. Memory sites. Just roll it around in your head. Memory sites. So I discovered Dr. Kelly's work in like February 2022, right? But this information has been out there for almost a decade because she published her doctoral dissertation in 2015, and then she published again in her book, The Memory Code, in 2016. And the moment that I found this out, I wanted to share this with everyone. I remember commenting on the YouTube video for the British Museum's new Stonehenge exhibit, and I got my head bitten off for being disrespectful and self-aggrandizing. Like I was showing off or like I knew more than the professionals who curated the exhibit. And I mean, I was teasing them a little. I probably sounded snarky, but I was just so excited. And I can't believe that no one's still catching on. I've been bursting to oh my gosh, I have been bursting to tell you this for years. And you would think that this would be front page news. That's what's so weird about this, because even though the information's been out there, even though Dr. Kelly, I know that Dr. Kelly has told archaeologists this, it seems like hardly anyone knows about it. They're making Netflix documentaries, and I want to just grab them and be like, hey, I need to talk to you. There's so many things that you don't know that would actually make things make sense. Because I could go on for days about ancient cultures. I could talk your ear off about Easter Island being the 8th land and how their origin myths said that if you ever leave this island, you'll never be able to find your way back again. I could tell you why the Easter Islanders' myths took characters on a trip around the island, naming sacred sites. I could tell you how Islanders told Catherine Routledge in 1914 that the Moais had names. And if you've been listening, you might get why that's important too. I could tell you tons about how even the way that you tell myths tells you information. Like I could talk for hours about the symbolism of myths and how we've been misunderstanding ancient sites, ancient myths, and ancient people. Because that's the thing. Everyone still thinks of myths as religious. They think that these sites are places for religious ritual. So I've heard them called temples, tombs, and places of worship. And what I want you to understand is this. We are misunderstanding them precisely because we misunderstand myths. We don't remember that the ancients used myths and mnemonic objects in the landscape to store unbelievable amounts of information. We don't remember that. We don't remember that they used myths to record history before writing was a thing. Nobody remembers that they used megalithic sites to relay knowledge across time. But once you've been initiated into this knowledge, so many things that archaeologists don't understand, they make so much sense. Like once you see ancient megalithic sites as knowledge exchanges, that's when other details start, clicking into place. Like the way that I see it, it makes sense that there's no rubbish, no burials, and no signs of settlement at these sites until later. Because people came there for events and then they left. Those burials and those settlements probably came after people forgot what those sites were for. It makes sense that the stones at Stonehenge don't match. Good. Because that makes it easier to distinguish between the stones and follow the sequence of your stories. It makes sense that there's thousands and thousands of broken pottery sherds at the end of Chaco Canyon's processional way. It makes sense because, for one thing, you wouldn't necessarily need your mnemonic pottery once you've stored your stories, their songs, and all of that information in your memory, right? And actually, I think there's another reason why you destroy your mnemonic pottery, but we'll come back to that. You'll see. I've heard experts ask, what motivation could Neolithic people possibly have to build sites like these? But it makes sense. It makes sense that they would spend so much time and so much energy hauling and carving these enormous stones and building these magnificent megalithic structures. It makes sense. Because isn't knowledge valuable? And aren't our university buildings grand? It makes sense that there's usually a large site that's nearby a smaller site. Like Dr. Kelly thinks that Stonehenge probably started as a public site, but then later it became a restricted site after the huge Durrington Wall site was built. It makes sense because knowledge is valuable. You don't entrust your most important knowledge to just any old nincompoop. You know what I mean? You build these big open sites to share this public knowledge, and then you save that very restricted, secret knowledge for these smaller sites. And then you pass on that restricted information at the smaller venue to just a few initiates. And so it makes sense that you'd build these underground spaces like fugus and passage tombs, because you're passing on your most restricted knowledge in these very tight, secretive, esoteric spaces. And it keeps out the uninitiated. And one of the things that Dr. Kelly said that actually made the biggest impression on me, she goes, knowledge is power. And we know this, right? We know knowledge is power. But then she said, that's why you don't leave your knowledge where the uninitiated can get their hands on it. And when she said that, I was like, what? Oh my gosh. Now it makes sense. This is why they intentionally buried Göbekli Tepe and some of these newly discovered ancient sites down in South America. These places that they're thinking that people buried on purpose. It makes sense. Because you don't leave your knowledge where the uninitiated can get a hold of it. Plus, remember I said there's another reason why you'd break your pottery at the end of Chaco Canyon's processional way? This is why. Because you don't leave your mnemonic wisdom, knowledge, information. You don't leave that where just any old nincompoop can get their hands on it. Of course you'd bury or break your higher levels of knowledge and hide it from the uninitiated. You know? These things, they make sense. They make sense. So listen, when you think of Druids dancing around a blazing fire at Stonehenge, what are they doing? They're remembering. When you see the Dinehe, the Navajo, and they're chanting the Beauty Way ceremony, what are they doing? They are remembering. And whether it's rituals like the hula, the haka, or throwing gold into Lake Titicaca, people were remembering. Because acting out information activates your memory. So do you see? Do you see? Everything connects up. Everything makes sense when you have the background story. When you understand what myths are, and when you understand how people use myths and memory to send messages across time. It explains megalithic sites all over the world. So let's recap. For memory cultures, while you're still hunting and gathering, everything that you know is encoded into your mythology, because stories store information. That information is practical. It's useful. It's rational. It's just disguised as these mythological, magical characters and events and places. And you tell it this way because it makes the myths more memorable. You back up your memory by encoding your story songs into handheld memory objects and by turning the landscape itself into a giant memory board. You sing, you chant, you dance, and you perform rituals and ceremonies at these sacred sites that are along your traditional paths because it reinforces that information that's encoded in the story songs associated with each site. Because acting out information activates your memory. But then, as your people adopt agriculture and as you start to, grow crops, and you're not going back to your sacred sites on a regular basis anymore, now you need new technology. So you invent it. And you build these huge megalithic sites to replace the land features. You reassign your mythology and all of its hidden information into this ring of stones or along paths shaped like an animal or lined with giant rocks or statues or however you've set up your memory site. And then you regularly gather with other people at your memory site to practice, to memorize, to learn. You still walk, you still sing, you still dance, you still chant. Not because you're worshiping, but because you're remembering. So Dr. Kelly calls these memory sites. But do you see it the way that I see it? Do you? Because the way I see it is that these ancient megalithic sites were facilitating the transfer of knowledge and records across time. They were like prehistoric universities. Do you understand how amazing that is? Roll it around in your mind for a minute. You guys, can you believe it? Oh my gosh. It is mind-blowing, right? They were there to protect and preserve information and pass it on. And we don't even think of them as places to learn. Why, I can't know. But when you stop seeing these sites as religious and start looking at them as places to learn, it changes everything. It changes everything. Do you see what this means? Because here's how I see it. When you know how to look at myths the right way, you start to understand that myths have always held humanity's memory, the records of our past. And they were disguised as stories. I mean, what is history but a chain of memories that's telling humanity's story? What is history but a chain of memories that's telling humanity's story? Every generation, you inherit your story, your history, your knowledge, and your wisdom from the ones who came before you. And then you update it, and then you increase it, and then you hand it on for the future. And you're continuously handing down knowledge, relay style, from one generation, one culture, to the next. Do you see what this means? Myths were just the way that we did that before we could write. So that means that myths are like a bridge between our past and our future. A time bridge. So we wouldn't forget. But we did forget because we stopped singing. But that's another story. Now, this is my interpretation of Dr. Lynne Kelly's work. I'm adding her piece to the puzzle. And I'm chipping in insight from my own years of research because everyone needs to know about this. And see, that's, what I've wondered for, I've been wondering this for a really long time. I can't understand it. How have I known about Dr. Kelly's theory for years and years and years, but nobody else seems to know? I'm like, why isn't this breaking news? And I'm fairly certain that I know why, which I'll explain in just a minute. What I want to say first is that even with Dr. Kelly's theory, the mystery of megalithic sites, it's not completely solved. Because look, I know that everyone's really very super interested in, how did they build these sites? Who built them? How did they move such massive stones? And trust me, because I'm interested too. I want to know. But you know what I think is way more interesting? What was in those myths? What else was hidden inside of those myths? We know there was this higher level restricted knowledge that they were handing down in these very special, restricted, esoteric spaces. And we know that only some people were given keys to access it. So what was that esoteric wisdom and knowledge that they were keeping hidden? What was this higher level secret business that was so vital, so valuable, so important that they built these monumental sites and then maintained them so lovingly for so many thousands of years. What was the message that our ancestors were trying to send us? That's where I come in. That's my part of the story. See, Dr. Kelly, she's not just describing how people remembered. The way that I see it, she's showing us that myths and megaliths are part of this very sophisticated information relay network that our ancestors used in order to send information across time for who knows how many thousands of years. And Dr. Kelly, she knows this. She knows it. She knows it. She knows it. She knows it. It's just that she is more interested in the memory side of it. But me, I'm more excited about what all this means about myths. Because look, okay, look, long before I ever heard of Dr. Kelly, I'd already been doing my own research because I had realized I could see inside of myths this higher level meaning that other people, I was like, they didn't seem to be able to see. I was like, why can't they see this? For years I've said that we're handing down directions for life disguised as stories. This was before I ever ran into Dr. Kelly, so it's really funny, right? But until Dr. Kelly, I didn't know how right I was. Because until Dr. Kelly, I didn't know how practical that those directions were. But you guys, when Dr. Kelly confirmed that our ancestors really did use myths to pass information across time, I was like, oh my God, I am right. Myths do encode directions for life. And part of those directions are a secret mythic code that's still hidden in our myths. It's a code that's carrying a higher level message that is so important, so vital, so valuable, it needs to live on forever. But it's a message we lost. We lost the keys to unlock this higher level meaning, who knows how many thousands of years ago. And I found the keys to unlock it, but I knew I couldn't tell you about it because I knew you wouldn't believe me. And I'm fairly certain that the reason that you wouldn't believe me is the same reason that nobody knows about Dr. Kelly's amazing discovery. Because to accept her interpretation of megalithic sites, in order to believe me that there's directions for life that are still hidden inside of our myths, you have to believe that myths contain hidden knowledge and information that not everybody has access to, that we passed throughout history. Nobody wants to believe that. Nobody wants to believe that. And I knew that you wouldn't believe me until you understood why we tell stories. Because we don't have this relationship with myths anymore. We assume our ancient ancestors were these magical thinkers who were making up myths to explain a world that they didn't understand. But they weren't. And we're wrong. We are the ones myth understanding. Our ancestors, they were very intelligent, very pragmatic people, and they were just trying to send information across time. And so the point is, contrary to popular belief, we weren't just telling stories to be telling stories. Myths have a real function, and they're still keeping alive a higher level wisdom that we forgot. So, okay, Sarah Booth, what was this knowledge that was so vital, so valuable, so important, they built these monumental sites? What is this higher level message that our ancestors were trying to send us? What are the higher level directions for life that are hidden inside of myths? Well, if you want to know, and you're plucky enough to come with me, have I got a story to tell you? And it's a story that'll take us on an adventure, thousands of years across time. A story about a secret organization sending information 10,000 years into the future. It's a story about broken chains of wisdom and forgotten history. It's a story about misunderstanding myths, losing the directions for life, and the truth that's hidden in plain sight. It's the story of how one lost piece of wisdom has changed the entire world. It's my story and it's your story, and it all connects. And I'll show you where to find the keys if you come with me. There's so much to show you, and it's a long story, but it's a good story. And trust me, you're going to want to hear the whole thing.